Turkey has closed its embassy in Damascus over what it calls deteriorating security conditions in Syria. Activities at the Turkish embassy have been suspended from Monday morning, and all diplomatic personnel have left the Syrian capital. Damascus accuses Ankara of interfering in its internal affairs. Turkey has called on President Bashar al-Assad to step down and has imposed sanctions on Damascus. Turkey has also been the main haven for Syrian opposition and armed groups. U.S. and Turkey now say they are considering sending more aid to the Syrian opposition. So far, the U.S. and a number of EU members and Persian Gulf Arab states have closed their embassies in Damascus. UN Arab League envoy Kofi Annan is heading to China to discuss Syria with officials in Beijing. Annan earlier held talks in Moscow. Russia backs Annan's peace mission and has urged him to work with both sides of the conflict in Syria. Moscow believes that the mission may be the last chance for Damascus to avoid a civil war. Both Russia and China oppose Western pressure on President Bashar al-Assad. The two permanent members of the UN Security Council are calling for a negotiated settlement to the months-long unrest in Syria. Now Annan is seeking a green light from China for a proposed initiative that calls for a political transition in Syria. Several studies have been published recently by international organizations and institutions about armed groups in Syria, their identity and their acts. Such studies come as a political solution is sought for the Syrian crisis. Muhammad Ali reports on that now from Damascus.
As the crisis continues in Syria, international organizations find it hard to keep silent. The Human Rights Watch has affirmed that armed groups in Syria are committing acts of kidnapping, detention, and torture of security forces personnel and government supporters. The United Nations estimates that more than 8,000 people, including 3,000 army and security personnel, have been killed since Syria unraveled into crisis last year.
Armed groups are throwing grenades on our houses. They are abducting, killing and torturing people. We want the army to put an end to armed groups.
Armed groups are launching RPG rockets from Al-Khaldiya neighborhood at us here. One of my friends was critically injured, in addition to 2 army personnel.
The Institute for the Study of War has said in its third Middle East security report that only 3 of Syria's most effective armed groups maintain direct ties with the opposition Free Syrian Army. In an article published by Reuters, a senior analyst from the International Crisis Group said armed groups in Syria are emerging on a very local level, mostly composed of civilians joined by defectors.
In Syria, there are armed groups with a terrorist and barbaric behavior. Not all armed groups are affiliated to opposition. Most armed groups are composed of civilians using modern weapons. They abduct civilians and use them as human shields, and they abduct them for ransom money too.
Syrian authorities confiscated different kinds of weapons, including RPG launchers, missiles, ammunition, and advanced communication devices. A number of sites used for making explosive charges were also found in different cities. Armed groups have killed large numbers of Syrians, mostly civilians, that they claim to protect. Several attacks targeted security and intelligence bases in the capital Damascus and Aleppo, leaving scores killed and wounded. As calls continue on all sides in Syria to stop violence, foreign-backed armed groups continue committing terrible crimes and horrific massacres, blocking the way of reform and a peaceful solution for the Syrian crisis. Muhammad Ali, Press TV, Damascus.